Welcome to Sunday's Got Us Talking, a podcast and community by Lauren Brown and Danielle Bell, because faith and ministry don't stop on Sundays.
Welcome to Sunday's Got Us Talking, where ministry, family, and everyday discipleship just doesn't stop on Sundays. So that is why we are here. And Lauren and I are so pumped about season 3, and it's called New or Renew. So you may be here and you're like, I need something new in my ministry. Or maybe you've been around a while and you're like, I need some renewal. And that's what we're about this whole entire season. So if you need vision or you need something new, we're here for you.
Yes. And today we are talking about something that every ministry leader experiences. They may not all want to talk about it, but here at Sunday's Got Us Talking, we are going to talk about it. And that is when things go wrong. And so behind every social media post or that staged backdrop that we take pictures, there is going to be a story. And to join us today to talk about it is our good friend, Taylor Johnson. So welcome. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you guys.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your ministry, your journey, and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm married. My wife Janae. We've been married for a little over 14 years. Actually, it's about 14 and a half years. That half year matters.
It does.
We've got 3 kids, 10, 9, and 4, and they're all soon to be 11, 10, and 5. And so they actually today just finished the last day of school. So they are super pumped that it's summer break. So things are a little crazy around our house right now, but it's a fun season. I grew up in a Christian family. We were in church all the time, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday nights, and a lot of other nights of the week because my parents had a key for pretty much my but grew up in church and got saved when I was 7. My grandfather, who was a pastor, baptized me when I was 8, just a few months later. And believe it or not, when I was 9 is when I knew that God was calling me to ministry. Of course, at 9, I had no idea what that meant. I just thought I was going to be a preacher because that's all we had at our church. We didn't have children's ministers and missions ministers and worship ministers. He was it. Of course, when you're 9, you can't really do a whole lot with that, anyways. But I just knew, and so I walked down the aisle and told my grandfather, I said, "Grandpa, I think I'm going to be a preacher one day." And so, went through the next several years of life and got the invitation to be an intern in kids ministry when I was 17. I didn't want to do it at first. I thought, man, kids ministry is just babysitting with a little bit of Jesus sprinkled on top. And when you're a naive 17-year-old boy, you think that's what it is, and really quickly learned that's definitely not the case. At least it shouldn't be. And how vital it is in the life of a church and the life of a family, and fell in love with it, and was in kids ministry from, I guess it was 2003 until about 2 weeks ago. So uh, I had no idea that that would be God's plan for my life, that I would be in kids ministry a long time. I really kind of thought I'll do kids ministry for a while, get my feet wet in ministry, and then I'll do something else. And the Lord just completely changed my heart on it. And I still love kids ministry, still love next gen ministries, always will. But in the last probably 6 months or so, the Lord was making it clear that He was going to point me in a new direction. And so I've accepted a role at one of our campuses as a campus and teaching pastor. And to be honest, it was pretty hard to make that shift, not just from taking a new role and being a pastor, but having to let go of kids ministry and next gen. There was definitely a releasing of that had to occur for sure. And so the Lord was faithful to do that. Not in that I don't love it anymore. I always will. It'll be a deep passion of mine. But so that's kind of where I'm at now, and kind of a 30,000-foot view of my ministry days. So
Yes, Taylor and I got to meet each other being on the Vacation Bible School team for Lifeway, the national team. So whole month of January, we travel around and teach. So we got to know each other really well. And when I heard about him moving to this pastor role, I was like, I can see it. The Lord is going to use him. And in children's ministry, you always want a pastor that is going to support family discipleship. And so I
mhm.
think that Taylor is going to be able to offer something special and great for his church, having that role in children's ministry for so many years. So Taylor, when you hear things will go wrong, what is the first thing that comes to mind in regards to ministry?
How long is this podcast? Because
Exactly.
Everybody sit back.
yeah. Oh man. I mean, probably the most obvious is not having enough leaders and volunteers. Having some of your tried and true volunteers quit or move or leave or whatever it may be, change churches. An event not going well. Having your budget cut. And having to navigate unexpected situations. I mean, the list goes on and on, but there's so many, but those are kind of probably, I mean, the first ones that come to mind. So those are probably pretty relevant for everybody listening.
And when we're in ministry and we talk to each other, we like to say what's going what's going good, Hey, here's what I did. But we want to be real with this one, and we know that not every event is a success story. So,
Yep.
Taylor, I know you're going to have to probably think hard, but have you ever planned an event that just completely missed the mark, did not go as you had hoped, you had dreamed, you had your vision, and what was it like, and what did you learn from it when it just didn't hit the mark?
Well, the answer is undoubtedly yes. Water's wet. So the answer is yes. We had, I believe it was 2017. I think it was the VBS theme Game On. It was my first VBS at my last church. And so, of course, in the first one, you really want things to go well. I mean, I had been there for 11 and a half months, but I had come in right after they had finished VBS. So this was my first VBS. And so we had gotten through the week of VBS. We had a family night and we had all the typical things, bounce houses, inflatables, food trucks, games, activities, all that kind of stuff. But because of the sports theme, I had hired out all these mascots to come. And so the Vanderbilt Commodore, the Tennessee Titans mascot, the Nashville Sounds mascot, Nashville Predators mascot. And so I was like, as a sports guy, I was like, and kids love mascots mostly.
Yeah.
But not all of them, but a lot of them do. So it was going to be great. I was super excited. Weather was absolutely perfect. And about 20 minutes before this event starts, as you guys know, people come early. So people are already showing up. The bounce houses are inflated, food trucks are out, music's playing, mascots are there, and we're ready to rock and roll. And my executive pastor came up to me and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know there's this huge storm that just one of those, kind of typical summer pop-up storms that came out of nowhere and it's coming straight for us. And it's going to be here probably in the next 20 minutes. And it's a pretty substantial storm. But I had a plan B. And so I was like, no big deal. We'll just shift everything inside. So we started moving tables and communicating to food trucks and, the bounce house people and doing everything we had to do to adjust. And as we started to adjust, the power goes out in the building. So we call, and at this point, the event is technically started. There's probably at this point, 300 to 400 people already there. And the power's out. So we called the electrical company and they said, it's due to this storm. It's going to be 3 to 6 hours before we can get the power back on. So my pastor, our executive pastor, and myself kind of huddle up and they're like, what do you want to do? Like, no. This is not my call. Like, this is your, this is bucks. And I said, but I mean, objectively, the reality is there's a huge storm, lightning, rain, wind, all that kind of stuff. It's coming straight at us on the radar. And there's no power. It's going to be 3 to 6 hours. So we have to cancel the event. I get a megaphone, stand on a table, tell everybody I'm terribly sorry, but this is the reality. And so send them all home. And in addition to the food trucks, we had bought like 100 Little Caesars pizzas. And so we're leaving. I'm handing this family 2 or 3 pizzas. This family,
Yeah, you are.
The mascots are loading up and leaving. The food truck people are leaving, and we owe them money now because they didn't make any money. The mascot people, they're in the car and they're leaving. And so within like 10 minutes of making the announcement that we were canceling, over half the people have already left. The power in the church comes back on and the storm went around us. So the sun's out, electricity's on, it's beautiful weather, and everybody's gone. Mascots, inflatables, food trucks, everything. And I'm just sitting there like, what in the world? It was my first one. And the only silver lining was it wasn't my fault.
There you go.
Right.
um, but it's one of those things like, what could we have done? And honestly, unless we had like a backup generator or something for the building, maybe, but it's just so rare to have both the electricity go out and a bad weather situation at the same exact time. And so that's kind of one you just look back at and laugh. Now it's kind of all you can do, kind of laugh so you don't cry. I lost some money, of course, but at the end of the day, it was out of my control. Um, you know, God knew it was going to happen for whatever reason. That's how it that's how it went down. But that one stings. But along those lines, though, sometimes those bad things happen and they are our fault. Sometimes we didn't plan well, we didn't communicate well, we didn't recruit enough leaders. Whatever it may be, and some of those things do happen, and all you can really do um, is really just try to improve, and take a hard look at yourself in the mirror and say, what did I do? The natural instinct for a lot of people, and I've done this, is like, and you don't say it out loud, but it's like, whose fault is this? Because it's not mine. Whose fault is?
Right. You brought people in on that decision, Taylor.
Yes, yeah. This was a team decision. And honestly, there have been times where I'm like, it was me. I didn't communicate with this person. I didn't plan well, or I didn't budget well enough, or whatever it may be. Wasn't organized enough. And thankfully I've been at churches where, there's grace. But it's still, it's embarrassing if things don't go how you hope they would. And because ultimately it's a reflection on us, right? If we're the ones responsible for the event, it's not the volunteers, who kind of get mud on their face. It's us. And so thankfully I've been at churches where there's been grace given. And you want to do things well. We want to strive for excellence in everything we do and do the best we can. But at the same time, we're also human. And there's going to be mistakes made. And so I just think it's hard to do, but gotta kind of do a self assessment, kind of do a SWOT analysis of your own plans, and see what caused this mishap and how can we improve it for the future.
I love that you say just like take that responsibility. This is a great lesson if you're a new ministry leader. I know in the beginning I would, just turn out some excuses, and I've probably said it more times than I care to talk about this year, but that was me. That was all me. And I think believers and Christians, like they respect that. Like,
Mm,
no, they don't want to hear it every week, but just sometimes you have to say, I don't know, maybe when you misprint the VBS verse on the back of the shirt, I don't know, I'm just pulling something out of the air. You just have to say, that's all me.
yeah.
I own it. I am sorry. And I love that, you said that because I think people respect that and they'll respect you more instead of hearing the excuses.
Hmm.
Now, Taylor, a lot of times we attach success with numbers. That's the church business sometimes,
Oh
or
yeah.
attendance or results. How how can we help? This is a great question for new leaders and just some seasoned leaders that may be discouraged. How do leaders distinguish between faithfulness, attendance, and results? And why
Mm.
do we put so much pressure on the numbers?
I honestly don't know where that comes from. But I think numbers are attractive, especially big numbers. I'm sure you guys have too, but I've sat at tables at conferences, and one of the first things people say, almost to kind of size you up, is how big is your church, or how big is your kids ministry? I'm like, what does that even matter? Um, but it's almost like how, and pastors do the same thing. But it's interesting. It's not even necessarily just churches. Like you see a news headline and it will say, you know, 80,000 people came to this event. For some reason, that's how the world justifies what we're doing, to try to set, to almost like to try to justify how good we are at our job. And it's a fine line because, like I said a minute ago, we want to strive for excellence. We want to do things well, and we do want things to grow. And whether it's good, right, or wrong, the reality is, if you go to your boss and you say the kids ministry has grown this year 36%, um, and you ask for a budget increase, there's a good possibility you're going to get a budget increase. But if your attendance is down 36%, but you want a budget increase, you're probably not going to get a budget increase. It's just the reality. And I think part of it is, attendance can be counted, budgets can be tracked, decisions can be reported, and faithfulness isn't a hard, tangible number. It's kind of invisible in some ways, and so But I always think back to, like, Jesus didn't choose 3,000 or 4,000 people. He picked 12. And so I think just going back to that principle, like, faithfulness is not about a number. I would rather have a, in my context now as a pastor, I would rather have a church of 300 people or 200 people who are sold out and faithful in obedience to the gospel and have gospel overflow in their lives, who are living in submission to the reign and rule of Jesus, than to have 5,000 people on a Sunday morning whose faith is completely shallow. They don't want to serve, they don't want to be involved, they don't give, they're not participants in the life of the church. And that sounds crazy to say, but I think faithfulness is what Jesus cares about. I don't think Jesus cares about how many people are in our ministries or in our churches. I think he cares about our heart posture, um, and whether we're faithful with what God has given us or not. And this, there are some churches, and anyone who's listening, I apologize if this is your context, but I know ministers who are at churches, children's ministers and next gen ministers, whose pastors or executive pastors um, who put numbers on them, for pressure. And if you don't baptize, 10 kids in the next month, you're going to get written up. Or if you don't have 600 kids at VBS this year, we're going to have a conversation. And that's unhealthy. I don't think it's biblical. Um, and you're gonna have major staff turnover. So I hope in my leadership, what my staff sees in me is the opposite of that. Like, yeah, of course we want to grow. Of course, that'd be great. Um, but like in Acts 2, it says, that the Lord added to their number daily. The Lord is adding to the number. Praise God. Um, we can manufacture our own growth and say the Lord did it. And it's not necessarily the case. And so I think it's, all about being faithful, like you said, and it is a fine line, because the reality is how we justify budget and space and all those kind of things, and hiring new staff is all based on numbers. So numbers in and of themselves aren't bad. But I wish I could remember the name of the pastor who said this. I've repeated it so many times, but a pastor once said, I saw this on social media. He said, growth isn't always an indicator of healthy growth. He said, because weeds grow too.
Oh,
And that just hit me. And I was like, man, that is so true. Now, the weed
mhm,
has to be healthy to grow, but it's still a weed.
right.
I don't know. It's a fine line that we walk in ministry. But hopefully, um, if someone who's listening to this, is feeling the pressure of, my identity as a legitimate kids minister or preschool minister, or someone who serves in next gen, is based on the number of kids or students in my ministry, it's just simply not the case. Um, are they hearing the gospel? Are they growing in their relationship with Jesus? And are you being faithful to point them to the gospel and to Jesus? And if the answer is yes, then if you only have 5 kids, who cares? If you have 500, that's great. But just be faithful with whatever numbers God has given you.
I love that you say faithful with what you have, because we do have some smaller churches that might be listening to this podcast, and they
Yep.
may feel like they're doing something wrong because their numbers are so small, or they're in a
Mhm.
smaller church and it's not growing. But just to be faithful with what they have. I love that you said that. When we move on and talk about things going wrong, often that can bring in some ministry tension, right? Some tension there. And so when we're looking at volunteers and we have that tension, what advice would you give us to handle conflict? So when the volunteers call in late, or when they're not prepared for what they're about to do, or simply just kind of have a bad attitude that day, what is your best advice on helping those volunteers and helping that conflict and that tension when things go wrong?
Well, I've never had conflict in ministry, so I don't even know what you're talking about.
Don't we all wish?
Oh man, if only, if only. Yeah, I think the number one thing is to not avoid it, not avoid the conflict.
Mhm.
That's in my early days of ministry, I just thought, if I just I'm not, especially now, I've grown, been in ministry long enough now. I've learned, you're actually making things dramatically worse by avoiding the conflict and avoiding the hard conversation and neglecting the tension that's there. Um, because it just festers and it grows and eventually they leave or whatever it may be. And so the number one is not to run from it, but I think the second thing is, you know, in the moment, if possible, and if it's an appropriate time and space to address it right there when it happens. You don't want to do it in front of kids or in front of parents or other leaders. You don't want to embarrass anybody, but at the same time, just go ahead and address it in the moment, and not address it, a week or 2 or 3 weeks later, because kind of then it's water under the bridge. Um, but in addition to that, I think one of the ways that I have tried to help mitigate some of those things, it's not the perfect method, but to try to build a culture with your team, your volunteers, and your staff and leaders, that we're a team and we're all in this together, and to let them know that they're not just a cog in the wheel or a puzzle piece in the puzzle of my ministry, so to speak, that's necessary to make things happen. I mean, the reality is we do have to have them, and we know that. But if they don't feel like they're appreciated, if they don't feel like they're being invested in, that's just only going to kind of breed, division and conflict and tension, because then they're just not going to want to be there anyway. And so I think trying to build a healthy culture, stopping in and checking with your leaders, asking how you can pray for them so that they actually know you, you know them by name, how you can pray for them, what's going on in their lives, that helps a lot. But in addition to that, I think, knowing your people, loving them. And so when those hard conversations are necessary, if they come in unprepared, which does happen sometimes, I always just try to, kind of zoom out and say, like, is this characteristic of them, or is this kind of a one off thing? Have I seen this before, or is this a pattern? Because how I'm going to handle it's going to be totally different. Like if somebody, like Lauren, I know you're always uber prepared. If you are one of my Sunday school leaders or life group leaders and you're always prepared, and then one Sunday you came in and you're not, I'm going to know, because of our relationship, and I know who you are and what kind of person you are and teacher you are. That's totally uncharacteristic of who you are. So I'm going to know something's probably gone wrong. You had a sick kid this week at the last minute, or your husband had to leave to go to town for work, or whatever it may be. There's something going on, but I'm still going to touch base and just see what's going on. If it is characteristic, if there's a pattern where someone's coming in unprepared, or there's a poor attitude, or they're lashing out at a child, something like that, that obviously needs to be addressed, and kind of get to the root of it and just go to the basics, and say, like, hey, what's going on? I've noticed this. Can you kind of explain what's going on and get a little bit more of the context for what's going on? It might be that they're kind of tired of leading and they're tired of teaching and they just don't want to do it anymore. Well, that's important to know too, because then it's not best for them, it's not best for the kids, and it's not best for you as a leader either. And so being able to say, well, let's talk through that, and let's talk through, what we need to do to get you in a better spot. And so that just all goes back though to the relationship with your leaders. And I think if you have a good relationship with your leaders and they have a good relationship with you, you're going to trust each other, and in doing so, when a hard conversation is necessary, it's not personal. You're able to just say, "Hey, let's talk about this," and they don't feel attacked, and we don't take it personal. And so that's kind of my approach.
I love that you're talking about relationships, because we have another episode with Bill Emiott, and he's
Oh
all
yeah.
talking about relationships and how important that is over programs. And I think it
Mhm.
feeds into this well. When things go wrong, the relationships we have with our volunteers and our parents will help us.
Yeah.
Especially if it was our mistake, that for a little bit more grace when we have those good relationships set up.
Absolutely.
And so, as we're talking about parents, I know we were just talking about volunteers, but when we look at parents, when we're handling people's children, whether they're students, children, preschoolers, there's a different level of
Yep.
responsibility there, and sometimes parents think we might not be handling that correctly, so there's going to be some criticism there and some conversations. So, what advice, if any different, would you give us?
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, kind of go back to what I just said, about the relationship. Do I know this family? Are they new? Are they new believers? And this is, a real example. This happened maybe 6 months ago. Um, had a new family, and they came in and they were critical right out of the gate. They were unhappy multiple Sundays in a row. There was some lashing out kind of in an open setting, twice. And then I found out that neither one of the parents are believers. Um,
Mhm.
Now, can that still happen with believers? Yes, but we have different expectations of believers than we do non-believers. I'm still going to handle both with grace and, be pastoral about it. But at the same time, there's a different level of grace that I'm going to have for someone who doesn't have a relationship with Jesus. They're coming to the church. They're trying to figure what this even is and what church is about and what the gospel is. And they're trying. But getting to know them and having a conversation, they've got a lot going on personally and in their family. So I was able to go to the rest of my team and to go to some of our volunteers and say, hey, I know what they did and what they said wasn't great, wasn't appropriate. However, I can't give you all the fine details of what's going on in their life, but I can tell you they're not believers. Here's a little bit of kind of vague context for there's some personal things going on. We need to give them an additional amount of grace. And
Um,
that changed the whole thing. And over time they adjusted and they did great. And so but there are also some times where your people who have been at your church for years and years and years all of a sudden get critical about something that you've done or the way that you're doing something, and they question it. And in my early days, I wore my heart on my sleeve, and I would get down in the dumps because, as you can have 100 parents in a row say, "You are the greatest children's minister that ever walked the face of the earth, and our children, have grown so much under your leadership." Blah blah blah, and you have one parent out of who give you critique, and that's the only thing you'll think about for
yeah.
days and days and days. I wish we weren't wired that way, but at least I am. And especially I was. Over time you grow a little bit thicker skin,
Yeah.
because critique just happens more and more over time. But it used to really bother me, and I finally got to the point where I'm like, I don't think this is personal. Most of the time, if someone, because there's a difference too in having a critical eye and a critical, and you can kind of identify that, and so in my mind, the people, I'm always willing to accept critique. It doesn't always feel good, but I know I'm not perfect. There's things decisions that I make that they may not be the best decision to make. But I try to help them understand this is the decision we made. This is why we made it. Help them to understand. People may not always like it, and I understand that. Um, but in doing so, um, sometimes you'll have people who are overly critical, or there's kind of a pattern of critique, and so the critical heart kind of starts to come out. And so I try to welcome critique as much as I can, but also at the same time understanding that some people are just critical people. And so those are hard conversations to have too. And navigating those conversations are hard because in my experience, sometimes there are just some people that doesn't matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, there are just some people that are never going to be pleased. I've kind of joked. You can cut this out if you want to, but I've said though that there are just some people that if we handed $100 bill to every single person on their way out the door, there would be at least one or two people who complain that it's not in tens and twenties.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's just
I can see that.
it's just the truth. 99% of people are fantastic. They're amazing people. And so if, it's just that like 1 or 2% that sometimes, are a little bit more vocal. But my kind of posture to that is if someone who is super involved in the church, they're there all the time, they're contributing to the life of the church and they give me constructive feedback or they're critical, I'm more than happy to listen because they're all in. But it seems to be the case most of the time is the people who are the most critical are the least involved. And so just try to take that critique with a grain of salt, and if it applied, they may be right. So it's hard. No one likes to be critiqued, whether it's constructive or whether it's not. But it's hard. It's hard because we don't like to be told that we didn't make a good decision, or that our event wasn't what they thought it was going to be, or our ministry isn't the best fit for them. because we think, no, kids ministry is where it's at. Like, kids ministry at my church is awesome. Like, what are you thinking? But understanding it's not always the best fit for everybody, and that's fine. So try to just develop some thick skin. Try not to take it personal because most of the time it's not.
So if you're listening and you're new, you're going to get critique. You need to hear it right now. You need to hear it. It is hard, hard, hard. Ministry is just hard. If nobody told you that, let us be the first to welcome you with that truth. And if you're listening and you feel beat up, this is encouraging that you're not alone. And I think we all got to remember that we answer to the Lord, and that is who we want to please. And there's two pieces of advice I've been given that help me because, I am a pleaser. I wore my heart on the sleeve and ran from confrontation. Now I'm like, let's just deal with this and move on. But one of them is if it's somebody and I love that you talked about that, Taylor, that your people and they're not acting like themselves. Assume there's something going on you don't know. We're quick to assume it's our fault and they don't like me. We all, we're so me centered. Assume there's something going on in their life we don't know and give them some grace, And then the second piece of advice when I started speaking, and we get the evaluations back in, and people can be brutal when they're not putting their name on something.
Yeah.
And somebody once told me, if one person tells you have a tail, you ignore it. If 10 people tell you have a tail, you may want to turn around and check. So we've all got that one person that's going to tell you you're doing it horrible.
Yep.
Sometimes you just got to let that go. But if you've got, some people coming to you going, hey, this event stunk, and it's 10 people that you trust, you need to check it out. So I've had to remember that with me, to take it and know when I have to really evaluate and when I don't.
Yep.
But Taylor, this one's going to get a little personal because sometimes the thing that's wrong is us. We might be a mess.
Yep.
And because, as I just said, ministry's tough. It's hard. So what are some signs you look for, maybe you've experienced, that a ministry leader is moving towards burnout? And what have you done when you've needed like renewal?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think it's super relevant. Um, unfortunately, and I know you both have seen this too. But ministry burnout happens all the time, and I feel like it's always happened. But I think because of the day and age of social media, we hear about it a lot more than we might used to, and I think it happens even more than we probably know about because we typically hear about it from uh, you know well-known pastors, worship leaders, people who have quite a following. We hear about them, but we don't hear about the children's minister at this small church in, Southern Mississippi or West Tennessee. We hear about the big names that people are familiar with because people recognize them. But I think it happens, unfortunately, a lot more than we realize. And one of the things that unfortunately, I have seen it happen in ministry. I've had some friends who have burned out. And one of the things that I've learned is that ministry burnout is never sudden. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Um,
Mhm.
that old phrase of like, if a ship out at sea gets off course by 1 degree, you don't notice it, for a few hours or a couple days, but over the course of a week, you're 1,000 miles off course. And so it's gradual and often unseen and unnoticed. Um, and so my former senior pastor said this, and I never forgot it. He said that ministry leaders don't explode, they implode. Uh,
Mm.
and I've just found that to be so true because you don't hear about, a pastor going into a mall and, setting off a bomb or doing a shooting where they physically explode outwardly. It's inward destruction, it's moral failures, things like that. And so I think, when I had a friend who called me one day, children's minister at a big church. He was well known. He spoke at a lot of conferences and called me and said that he was no longer going to be in ministry and he was disqualified. And I never saw it coming. I never saw anything in his life that told me, you should suspect that. And so what that tells me is kind of what I was saying a minute ago is it's often unseen, and very gradual, and all of a sudden it kind of comes out. And so, but some things that I have seen and kind of observed of kind of patterns of behavior is, you don't see the visible joy in them that you once did in ministry. They begin to resent being around people, especially at church. Um, you often see, and you may not see this, but this is a common thing of a lack of desire to be in the Word, lack of a desire for prayer. They kind of withdraw. They desire isolation, and there's so many more. But when that happens, it's usually a pretty good red flag that something's wrong. And I've had times where I find myself not resenting people. Sometimes it's come after a season of critique, or something like that, where I'm just like, oh, like I really don't feel like doing this today. And that's a red flag. Like something's off. Um, Honestly, one of the big indicators for me is how I respond to my wife and my kids. Um,
Mhm.
if I am being impatient with my wife and kids, if I'm being short tempered, or I'm making something that should be a 2, I act like it's a 10 and it's something small. I'm like, something's going on in my heart and I needed to address this. And so that's when I think we really need to run back to scripture. We need to run back to the word. We need to be really dedicated and diligent about our prayer life. And I think that's where it's super important that you have 2, 3, 4 people in your corner who know you, who love you, who you can trust, you can be completely transparent with. You can say all the things you're struggling with, all the things you're frustrated with that your pastor said or your boss said, or whatever it may be that's really burdening you, who can say, hey, we're recognizing like you're off 2 or 3 degrees and we don't know what's causing it, but we see it and we want to let you know. Like I said, that all goes back to relationships, and knowing like those people are not out to get me. Those people are for me, and so when they say, "Hey, we're noticing, you're short tempered with your spouse," or, "You seem like you've lost some joy," or, "How long has it been since you've been in the Word for you and not in preparation to teach something?" Um, because of that relationship, and they love you and they are for you, you listen. And having someone, so that's where the isolation thing is incredibly dangerous, because if you don't have someone who can call you out when you need to be called out, it's really dangerous. And so I've got a couple of friends who are in ministry. We're all at different churches. We tell each other all kinds of stuff, the good, bad, and the ugly. They know what's going on in my marriage. They know what's going on with my kids, what's going on in ministry, things I'm focused on, things I'm worried about. And we know that about each other. And that's incredibly helpful. And they just they're happy to call me on the carpet if I need to be. And so it's good to have someone in your corner who can identify smoke before there's flames. And so
Mhm.
I think it's super important.
Those are good words for people that are discouraged, and I love that you talked about you have people that are
Mm.
speaking truth in your life in those hard seasons, and
Yep.
I know I've been at a church before where we were required to take a Sabbath every
Yep.
so often, which, is not a gift everywhere if that's something you need, and I'm talking a day Sabbath. Like, I get a different kind of Sabbath here after 5 years, but we're talking like once a quarter, you had to go a
Mm.
day.
Yep.
And that may be something you need to implement. I know in our monthly touch bases, we have to say whether we're surviving, thriving, or reviving
Mhm.
spiritually, in ministry, family wise. And I love that my pastor's like, You're reviving a lot right here. You don't get burned out, and that's a good signal. We got to like really look at what we're circling. If we're always circling surviving, that should be a red flag to us.
Yep.
Taylor, you've given some great truth. So let's just say one thing that you want leaders to remember when ministry gets messy. What would you tell them?
Oh, man, that one's hard. I would say always go back to your calling.
Mhm.
Um, because ministry, while it is technically our job, it's how we get paid, or most of us get paid. You may be bivocational, or you may be a lay children's minister or preschool minister or whatever. But regardless, it's not just a 9 to 5 job. This is a calling. And so in my office, I have my ordination certificate on the wall, and it's not to show people that I'm ordained. I have it right beside my computer for the sole purpose of when I'm having a hard day, if someone's being critical, if I'm behind on budget, or whatever it may be. And I'm kind of feeling the weariness of ministry because ministry, let's just call it what it is. It's hard. Um, and the enemy wants to do anything and everything to kind of poke holes in what we're doing and to get us distracted. Um, and so when ministry gets hard, I just kind of glance up at my ordination certificate and remember back to my calling, that this is a calling that God put on my life. This wasn't my idea. I'm so thankful that it is my calling, that God gave it to me. It's a gift, but it's hard, and so I think it's super important to go back to our calling because that's what ultimately sustains us. That this was a God given calling on my life or your life to do this particular role. And ministry seasons and assignments may change, but ultimately, God has called you to ministry, and rest in that calling. And even more, even more so than that, go back to the gospel. We need to preach
Mm.
ourselves every single day that this isn't about me. It's not about my ministry or my budget or any kind of accolades or speaking opportunities or whatever it may be. This is first and foremost about the gospel and pointing the next generation to Christ or the church to Christ, or whatever your context is, and go back to the calling and say, you know what, today's hard, but there's always tomorrow, and He gives us new mercies every morning. And so today's going to be hard, but tomorrow's a new day, and I'm going to rest in my calling and know this is exactly where God's called me to be.
Yeah, Taylor, you have been such a great guest today. You've talked transparently and honestly about some issues that are just tough in ministry, and I appreciate you saying that about the calling. Sometimes I see a lot of young people that love Jesus and don't know what they want to do with their life, so they're like, "I'm going to go work at the church," and can get really burnt out or hurt, and that I didn't pick this for my life. God did. God chose this, so I have to go back to that over and over and go, okay, did you really know what you were doing, God? So thank you for that word. We do always like to close in prayer. So Lauren, why don't you close this in prayer in this episode? And again, Taylor, you've been great. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity that Danielle and I have this voice just to encourage and empower ministers and leaders, Lord. And we know that things go wrong on the regular. Lord, there's volunteers that aren't showing up or criticism that's being had, Lord. I'm just so thankful for a community of leaders that we can come together and encourage one another and lift up one another. So for the listeners that are listening, Lord, I just pray a blessing and an extra just strength for them as they go throughout their day. If they are feeling burnt out or if they are struggling with tension in ministry, Lord, we just ask that anyone right now sitting in this moment, listening, Lord, feels your presence, feels your comfort, Lord, and that you remind them and you remind us of the calling and the gift that you've given us to do what we get to do, Lord. We get to wake up every day. We get to work with families and leaders and volunteers, Lord, to spread the gospel, to share the gospel, to let those that we're talking to learn a little bit more about you every time that we meet in our small groups or in our events or our activities that may or may not go well, Lord. Our intent is to help others draw closer to you, Lord. So I do pray a blessing over our churches, over the churches of the ministers that are listening, Lord. And we thank you for who you are. We're thankful that amongst the burnout and the craziness and the struggle, that you are faithful and that you are with us, Lord. We thank you so much and we love you. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. Be sure to join the community at SundaysGodIsTalking.com and on your favorite social media platform.